"Who did this to you?" said the lonely rancher. He promised that no one would ever touch her again. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of dry grass and the faint smell of horses and cattle from the nearby fields. He had lived on this land for nearly 20 years, and in all that time, he had known very few people. The ranch was far from any town, and the only sounds that broke the silence were the occasional call of a bird or the low moo of a cow. Life here was quiet, steady, and simple, but it was also lonely. Every morning he followed the same routine. He fed the animals, checked the fences, and walked along the edges of his property to make sure nothing had gone wrong during the night. He was used to being alone, to the steady rhythm of chores and the endless horizon that seemed to stretch forever. But that morning felt different. There was an unusual silence in the air, a tension he couldn't explain. He shrugged it off, blaming the wind, and continued his work. It was while he was fixing a broken fence post that he noticed something unusual near the edge of the pasture. A young woman was sitting under the shade of an old oak tree. She had a small bundle with her, and her posture suggested exhaustion. She wasn't from the town he occasionally visited. He would have recognized anyone who lived nearby. And something in the way she held herself, tense and guarded, immediately caught his attention. He felt a strange pull, an instinct he hadn't felt in years. Carefully he approached, keeping his hands visible so as not to startle her. "Good morning," he said softly. She flinched slightly at his voice, and he stopped a few feet away. Her eyes were wide, cautious, and there was a hint of fear in them. "Are you all right?" he asked, trying to keep his tone gentle. She didn't answer at first, only glancing toward the ground, her fingers twisting the edge of her blanket nervously. For a long moment he considered leaving her be. People passing by were not uncommon, though rare, and some preferred solitude. But something about her situation told him she wasn't just passing through. Something told him she needed help, so he stayed, keeping a safe distance. "You don't have to talk if you don't want to," he said quietly. "I can leave you be." She looked at him then, really looked at him, and he noticed the subtle signs of weariness in her face, the dark circles under her eyes, the pale skin, the small tremor in her hands. She was scared, but she was also tired, and that tiredness spoke of someone who had been carrying a heavy burden for far too long. The rancher, though he had lived a life of solitude, felt a surge of protectiveness he hadn't expected. Slowly she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. I don't know where to go," she said. "I didn't mean to, I needed a place to rest." He nodded, understanding more in her words than she could have intended. She wasn't asking for much. She just wanted safety, even if only for a little while. "Come with me," he said after a pause. "You can rest at my place. I have food, water, and a bed. You don't have to stay long if you don't want to, but at least you'll be safe for the night." She hesitated. The instinct to run, to protect herself from strangers, was strong. But the rancher could see the subtle shifts in her body language, the way her shoulders relaxed just a little, the way her eyes flickered toward the distant barn, as if considering the possibility of shelter. After a moment she nodded, almost imperceptibly, and rose slowly. Walking back to his house together, he kept a respectful distance, letting her set the pace. He noticed the careful way she placed her feet on the uneven ground, the way she clutched her bundle to her chest as if it were the only thing keeping her grounded. He didn't ask questions. He didn't press. He simply walked beside her, silently promising safety without using words. When they reached the house, the rancher went inside first to light a fire and prepare some tea. The smell of fresh bread and the warmth of the small cabin seemed to make her relax slightly, though her eyes never left the floor. He left the tea on the table and gestured toward a chair. "Sit," he said gently. "Take your time." She moved cautiously but obeyed, her hand still gripping her bundle. The rancher watched her, noting every small movement. He had lived alone for so long that he was used to noticing the subtle cues of people's emotions. How a slight tremor could betray fear, how a downcast gaze could speak of shame, or how a hesitant hand could indicate uncertainty. All of these signs were present in her, and he felt a quiet determination growing inside him. Over the next few hours, they didn't talk much. She ate a little, sipping the tea he had made, while he went about small chores around the house, fixing a loose hinge, stacking firewood, and tidying the space so it would feel welcoming. She watched him, her eyes softening gradually as the simple rhythm of his movements gave her a sense of normalcy. For the first time in a long while, she didn't feel the constant weight of danger pressing down on her. As evening fell, the rancher prepared a small bed in the corner of the cabin. It wasn't much, just a mattress with clean blankets, but it was warm, safe, and dry. "You can rest here," he said. "I'll be nearby if you need anything." She nodded, still wary but beginning to understand that he meant what he said. That night, as the fire crackled and the wind whispered outside, she lay down on the bed, clutching her bundle. The rancher kept watch silently, the lines of his face softening as he realized that this young woman, weary and fragile, had walked into his life and shifted something inside him he hadn't felt in years. He didn't know her story yet. He didn't know what had brought her to this remote corner of the world or what shadows followed her. But he knew one thing with absolute clarity. She would not face danger tonight, not under his roof, not while he was here. And as he watched the flickering firelight play across the walls, he made a quiet promise to himself and to her, a promise that would guide the days to come. No one would ever hurt her again, not while he was there. The rancher returned to his chair by the fire, letting the warmth seep into his bones. Outside, the stars began to twinkle in the clear night sky, each one a silent witness to the beginning of a new chapter in both their lives. He didn't know what challenges awaited them, and he didn't know how long she would stay. But for now, in the quiet of the cabin, in the soft glow of the fire, they were both exactly where they needed to be, safe, alive, and on the edge of a story that had only just begun. The morning sun poured through the cabin's small windows, casting a warm glow across the wooden floor. The young woman had slept peacefully for the first time in many nights, and the rancher was quietly relieved. He watched her from a distance as she slowly stirred, rubbing her eyes and stretching. There was a fragility about her that made him cautious, but there was also a quiet strength hidden beneath it, a resilience that had kept her going until now. After a simple breakfast of bread, eggs, and tea, the rancher suggested they take a walk around the property. The girl hesitated at first, unsure if leaving the cabin was safe. She had been on guard for so long that even a gentle invitation felt like a risk. But something about the rancher, his calm voice, his steady presence, made her consider it. She nodded slowly, and together they stepped outside into the bright morning air. The ranch was quiet except for the soft rustling of the grass in the wind and the distant lowing of the cattle. The rancher walked beside her without saying much, letting the silence fill the space between them. Sometimes, the most comforting presence is one that doesn't demand anything, and he understood that. He knew that rushing her, asking too many questions too soon, would only push her away. Trust, he thought, had to be earned slowly, like planting seeds in the soil and waiting for them to grow. As they walked along the fence line, the rancher finally spoke, his voice gentle but steady. "You don't have to tell me anything you're not ready to share, but if you ever want to talk, I'm here." She didn't respond immediately, only keeping her eyes on the ground. But the words seemed to sink in. For the first time in a long time, she realized that there was someone who genuinely cared, not out of duty or obligation, but simply because it was the right thing to do. Later that afternoon, as they returned to the cabin, the rancher noticed her hesitation at crossing the creek that ran along the edge of the property. Her hands trembled slightly as she gripped the wooden railing. He stopped and looked at her, his expression calm. "Take your time," he said. "I'll be right here." Slowly, carefully, she crossed, one cautious step at a time, and reached the other side without incident. She glanced back at him, a faint smile touching her lips, and he nodded encouragingly. That evening, after the chores were done, they sat together on the porch, watching the sun dip behind the hills. The girl finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. I haven't had a place to feel safe in a long time," she said, staring at her hands. The rancher didn't interrupt, didn't offer empty reassurances. He simply nodded, letting her continue. "My family, they weren't safe for me," she continued, her voice trembling slightly. "I had to leave. I had nowhere to go." She paused, swallowing hard, as if trying to push back the memories that threatened to overwhelm her. The rancher stayed silent, understanding that words weren't always necessary. Sometimes the act of listening, of simply being present, was enough. Over the next few days, the rancher and the young woman settled into a quiet routine. She helped with simple tasks around the ranch, feeding the animals, gathering firewood, tending to the small garden he maintained. She was hesitant at first, unsure if she could trust herself or anyone else, but the rancher never forced her. He only guided, encouraged, and supported. Slowly, she began to regain a sense of normalcy, discovering that life could be predictable, steady, and safe. During one afternoon in the barn, she stumbled upon a loose nail while stacking hay. She cried out in surprise, and the rancher rushed to her side. "Are you all right?" he asked, his tone filled with concern. She nodded, but he could see the small tremor in her hands, the way her body stiffened as if bracing for something worse. "I'm fine," she whispered, but he gently placed a hand on her shoulder. "It's okay. You're safe here. Nothing is going to hurt you." Her eyes welled up, and for a moment she let herself lean into his reassurance. It was the first time she had allowed someone to see her vulnerability, and it was terrifying and liberating all at once. She realized that protection wasn't just about keeping someone physically safe. It was about giving them the courage to feel, to trust, and to begin healing. The rancher noticed subtle changes in her over the following days. She smiled a little more often, though still shyly. She began to speak more, even if only in small sentences. She laughed quietly at minor jokes, and for the first time in a long while, the weight of fear seemed lighter, if only slightly. He knew the journey ahead would not be easy. Trust could be broken in an instant, and healing could take years. But he also knew that each small step mattered, and he would be there for every one of them. One evening, as they sat by the fire after finishing the day's chores, she finally shared a small piece of her story. "There was someone I thought I could trust," she said softly, "but they hurt me. I couldn't tell anyone. I had to leave." She paused, struggling to find the words, the pain evident in her eyes. The rancher didn't interrupt. He simply nodded, letting her continue at her own pace. "I kept moving, hoping no one would find me," she continued, her voice breaking slightly. "But no matter where I went, I couldn't escape the fear, the memories, the feeling that I wasn't safe anywhere." She looked at him then, her eyes wide and searching. "I don't know if I can ever feel safe again." The rancher reached out, gently placing a hand over hers. "You are safe now," he said firmly but kindly. "No one will ever hurt you here, not while I'm around. You can take your time, and when you're ready, you'll be able to trust again." There was a pause, and then she nodded slowly, a tear slipping down her cheek. It was the first tear she had allowed herself to shed without fear in a very long time. As days turned into weeks, the ranch became a sanctuary for her. She began to enjoy the simple pleasures of life, the warmth of the sun on her face, the smell of fresh hay, the sound of animals moving around the fields. She learned to trust the rancher in small ways, asking questions about the land, helping with chores without fear, and sharing brief stories about her past when she felt ready. Each day, the invisible walls around her heart seemed to weaken, replaced by a cautious hope. One afternoon, as they repaired a section of the fence together, the rancher asked gently, "Do you ever think about what comes next?" She paused, gripping the wooden plank she was holding. I don't know, she admitted. I've never had a future I could plan. I've only ever survived. That's okay, he said softly. You don't have to plan anything yet. You just have to take one day at a time. And I'll be here to help you through each one. His words weren't grand or dramatic, but they carried a promise that was far more powerful than anything else. Someone who would not abandon her. Someone who would stay even when it was hard. Someone who cared. By the time the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, she felt a small spark of hope. For the first time, she allowed herself to imagine that she could have a life without fear, a life where she didn't have to constantly watch her back or run from danger. The rancher's presence, steady and unwavering, was the anchor she had needed. That night, as they sat by the fire once more, she quietly said, "Thank you." The rancher nodded, his expression calm, but inside he felt a surge of emotion. He knew the road ahead would not be easy, that there were still shadows from her past that could reappear at any moment. But for now, she had taken the first step toward healing, and that was enough. She lay down to sleep that night with a sense of peace she had never known. The rancher watched over her as he had the first night, keeping his silent vigil. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but he knew one thing with certainty. He had made a difference in her life, and he would continue to do so, no matter what challenges came their way. The days on the ranch had begun to settle into a quiet rhythm, but the calm was deceptive. The young woman had grown more comfortable with the rancher and the safety of the land, yet there was always a lingering shadow behind her eyes, a reminder that her past had not disappeared. It was only resting, waiting. She could feel it in small ways, a sudden noise, a stranger's glance, or even the memory of someone who had once hurt her. It was like a cloud that never fully lifted. One morning, as the rancher was tending to the cattle, he noticed that she had not joined him for breakfast, which was unusual. Concerned, he went to check on her. She was sitting by the edge of the garden, staring at the soil, her hands fidgeting with the small stones around her. "Are you all right?" he asked gently, kneeling beside her. She flinched slightly at his touch but didn't move away. I just had a bad dream," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. She spoke slowly, as if each word took effort to release. "I dreamed they were here. I could feel them, like they were watching me." The rancher understood immediately. Though she had never shared the full details of her past, the fear in her voice was unmistakable. It wasn't just a memory, it was a deep, lingering terror that refused to leave. He placed a hand on her shoulder, careful not to frighten her. "You are safe here," he said firmly. "No one will come near you while I'm around. You can stay here as long as you need." She looked at him, her eyes filled with both doubt and hope. The thought that someone could truly protect her felt almost foreign, but she wanted to believe it. As the morning passed, they worked side by side, repairing a broken section of fence. The sun was warm, the smell of hay in the air, and the distant sound of cattle lowing made the world feel ordinary. Yet beneath the ordinary, the tension of her past lingered like an uninvited shadow. She jumped at sudden movements or unfamiliar sounds, and sometimes she would stop mid-task, her hands trembling as memories flashed through her mind. The rancher noticed these moments, but he didn't press. He simply stayed close, offering quiet reassurance without demanding explanations. Later that afternoon, as they were mending the barn roof, a distant rider appeared on the trail leading to the ranch. The girl froze instantly, her breath catching in her throat. The rancher noticed the sudden change in her demeanor and instinctively moved in front of her, shielding her from view. "It's all right," he whispered. "Just stay behind me." The rider's approach made her heart race. She instinctively reached for the rancher's arm, seeking the safety she had come to trust. The rider dismounted at the edge of the property, and the rancher stepped forward to greet them. "Can I help you?" he asked, his voice steady, but there was a watchfulness in his eyes. The visitor, a stranger, looked around the ranch and then at him. The rancher could sense nothing threatening in their presence, but he also sensed the girl's unease. He placed a hand on her shoulder again, silently telling her to stay calm. After a brief conversation with the stranger, it became clear that the visitor had come with no harmful intent. They were simply a traveler seeking directions, yet the encounter left the girl shaken. Once the rider had gone, she sat down heavily, her hands covering her face. "It felt like they were here," she whispered, "even though they were." The rancher knelt beside her and gently asked, "Do you want to tell me more about them?" She hesitated, staring into the distance, as if weighing whether to share her secret or keep it buried. Finally, she spoke, her words trembling but deliberate. "They hurt me. I trusted them, and I can't even say it." Her voice broke and she began to cry quietly. The rancher didn't interrupt. He simply put a hand on her back, rubbing gently, letting her release the fear and pain she had been carrying for so long. For hours they stayed like that, her sitting, crying and speaking in fragments, and him sitting beside her, offering comfort and protection. He asked questions only when she seemed ready, and he never forced her to continue. Gradually, she began to talk about the details she could manage, how she had been betrayed by someone she trusted, how she had felt trapped and alone, and how escaping had been the only option. The words were painful, but releasing them gave her a strange sense of relief. As the sun dipped low on the horizon, she finally looked at him, her eyes red and swollen from crying. "I've never told anyone," she said softly. "I've always been alone with this." The rancher nodded, understanding the weight of her confession. "You're not alone anymore," he said firmly. "I won't let anyone hurt you again, I promise." She stared at him, disbelief and hope mingling in her expression. "Promise?" she asked, her voice fragile. "I promise," he replied, his tone unwavering. Over the next several days, the rancher helped her confront her fears in small, manageable ways. They walked together around the property, visited the creek, and even tended the animals in ways that required her to look beyond her past. Each time she faced a trigger, like a sudden noise, an unexpected shadow, or even a stranger passing by, he was there, calm and steady, helping her navigate the fear without overwhelming her. One afternoon, while repairing a section of the barn, she froze suddenly at the sound of a loose board creaking. Her body tensed and her eyes widened. The rancher immediately stepped beside her. "Breathe," he said softly. "I'm here. You're safe." Together, they slowly investigated the sound, and when it was clear there was no danger, she exhaled, a mixture of relief and residual fear washing over her. Moments like these became small victories, slowly building her confidence and resilience. That evening they sat on the porch together, watching the sun set. The girl leaned against the rancher, a sign of trust she had rarely shown to anyone. "I'm scared sometimes," she admitted quietly. "Even here." He nodded, understanding completely. "It's okay," he said. "Fear doesn't go away instantly, but each day you're stronger, and every day you're safe here. I won't let anything happen to you." The night was calm, yet the rancher knew that healing wasn't a straight path. There would be setbacks, moments when memories would return and fears would flare up. But he also knew that the foundation they were building, trust, protection, and care, was strong enough to withstand those challenges. And more importantly, he knew that she was starting to believe in her own strength, even if only a little. Days turned into weeks, and the bond between them grew stronger. She began to participate more in daily life, helping with chores without hesitation, and even laughing quietly when small accidents happened around the ranch. The rancher noticed subtle changes in her demeanor, the way she stood a little taller, the way her hands no longer trembled as much, and the way she looked at the horizon with a faint hint of hope. Each small step was a victory, each day a testament to her courage and resilience. One afternoon, as they worked in the garden, the rancher gently asked, "Do you ever think about trusting someone completely?" She paused, brushing soil off her hands. "I want to," she admitted, "but it's hard." "I've been hurt before and I don't want to be hurt again." He nodded, not minimizing her fear. "I understand, and you won't be. Trust takes time and we'll take it one step at a time." Her eyes met his, and for the first time there was a quiet understanding between them, a bond that didn't need words, built on patience, empathy, and unwavering protection. That night, as she lay down to sleep, she felt a sense of safety she had never experienced before. The rancher's presence was steady and reassuring, and for the first time, she allowed herself to imagine a life where she could feel secure, even if the past still lingered in shadows. He watched her sleep, silently vowing that no one would ever hurt her again. The promise was not just a fleeting thought, it was a commitment, one that would guide every decision he made from that moment onward. He knew that the journey ahead would be long, filled with challenges and moments of doubt, but he also knew that together they could face them. And in that quiet cabin, surrounded by the vast expanse of the ranch and the soft glow of the fire, the first true moments of healing began to take root. The past had not vanished, but it had been confronted, faced with courage, and met with unwavering protection. And that, the rancher knew, was the beginning of a new chapter, a chapter where fear slowly gave way to trust, and loneliness gave way to connection. The days on the ranch grew longer and brighter as the young woman slowly adjusted to her new life. The sun poured over the rolling hills, and the quiet rhythm of chores, animals, and the gentle swaying of trees became a comforting soundtrack to her days. She was learning that life could be steady, predictable, and most importantly, safe. But safety was not the same as freedom. Healing required courage, and courage required facing the world, even in small ways, while trusting that she would be protected. One morning, as the rancher prepared the animals for the day, he noticed her hesitating near the barn entrance. The shadows inside seemed to trouble her, and she paused, taking deep breaths. "What's wrong?" he asked, his voice calm and patient. She looked at him, her eyes filled with both fear and determination. I think I want to feed the horses," she admitted softly, "but I'm scared." He nodded encouragingly. "It's all right, take it slow. I'll be right here with you." Together, they walked into the barn. The scent of hay and the soft sounds of the animals filled the space, and the girl's shoulders tensed. But step by step, under the rancher's steady guidance, she reached the horses and began to feed them. Her movements were cautious, careful, and deliberate, but each handful of feed she offered brought a small, growing sense of accomplishment. The rancher didn't rush her or offer excessive praise. He simply stayed near, letting her know through presence rather than words that she was safe. By mid-afternoon, they were repairing fences along the far side of the property. The young woman carried tools with slightly more confidence than before, her hands steadying as she learned the rhythm of work. The rancher walked beside her, showing her how to hammer nails into posts and secure broken boards. With each task completed, her posture straightened slightly, her steps became more deliberate, and the invisible weight of fear seemed to lighten a little. Yet even as she grew stronger, moments of vulnerability returned. One afternoon, a stray dog wandered near the ranch. It barked loudly, startling her. She froze, gripping the nearest fence post. The rancher immediately moved in front of her, shielding her from view and softly calling the dog away. "It's all right," he said calmly. "See, nothing happened." "You're safe." She exhaled slowly, a mixture of relief and lingering fear washing over her. Each moment like this was a test of her courage, and each time she faced it, she gained more strength. As the days passed, she began to take small steps toward rebuilding her independence. She helped with the garden, planting seeds and watering the soil. She learned to ride one of the rancher's horses, starting with short, cautious rides around the yard before venturing further along the property. The rancher was always near, guiding her, encouraging her, and quietly reminding her that she was safe. Slowly, the world outside her past began to feel less threatening. One afternoon, while tending the small vegetable patch, she noticed a rabbit darting across the field. She froze, instinctively stepping back, but then looked at the rancher. He smiled reassuringly, pointing gently. "Go ahead," he said. "You can watch it, you're safe." She took a hesitant step forward, then another, her fear giving way to curiosity and wonder. For the first time in years, she felt a spark of joy, a simple, pure pleasure in observing life without dread. Evenings were quiet and comforting. After the day's work, they would sit by the fire, sometimes in silence, sometimes talking quietly. The young woman began to share more about herself, little by little. She spoke of hobbies she had abandoned long ago, of dreams she had once had but buried beneath fear, and of small memories that reminded her of a life before trauma. The rancher listened attentively, never judging, never interrupting, simply being present. His presence alone gave her courage to speak. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, she asked the rancher a question she had avoided for a long time. "Do you think I could ever feel normal again?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. He looked at her steadily, considering his words carefully. "Normal is different for everyone," he said gently. "But I do believe you can feel safe, happy, and confident again, and I'll help you every step of the way." Over time, small victories became moments of real joy. She laughed more freely at small mishaps on the ranch. She began to plan her days, learning to trust her instincts. She even helped the rancher care for the animals without hesitation, brushing the horses, feeding the chickens, and collecting eggs. Each action, though ordinary, was extraordinary for her, a tangible sign that she was reclaiming her life. But life was not without challenges. One afternoon, a storm rolled in suddenly. The wind howled and rain poured down in sheets, threatening to flood parts of the ranch. The girl panicked at first, her body tense and trembling as memories of past chaos and danger resurfaced. The rancher took her hand, leading her to the safety of the barn. "It's all right," he said calmly. "We've faced storms before and we'll face this one together. Nothing will hurt you here." Slowly she calmed, learning once again that safety was real and protection could be trusted. As the storm raged outside, the two of them sat in the barn, listening to the rain drum against the roof. The rancher began to talk gently about his own past, not in a way that overshadowed her story, but in a way that showed her she wasn't alone in experiencing hardship. He spoke of times when he had felt lonely, scared, or unsure, and how he had learned to face life one step at a time. The young woman listened quietly, drawing strength from his calm presence and the realization that life could still hold moments of peace even after pain. Days turned into weeks and she began to dream again, small dreams at first, like planting a new flower in the garden, riding a horse along the farthest fence line, or even visiting the nearby town for supplies. Each dream was a step toward freedom, toward reclaiming her own life. The rancher supported these steps without pressure, offering guidance and reassurance when needed. Slowly, the world outside her past became less frightening, and the ranch became a place of healing, growth, and hope. One evening, while watching the stars appear in the darkening sky, she turned to the rancher and spoke softly. "I think I'm starting to feel like myself again," she said. The words were fragile but filled with meaning. He nodded, a quiet smile on his face. "That's wonderful," he said. "And remember, you don't have to rush. Healing is a journey, not a race. Each day, you're moving forward and I'll be here for every step." The young woman allowed herself to believe in the promise he had made, the promise of safety, protection, and unwavering support. For the first time, she could imagine a future where she wasn't defined by her past, where she could make choices without fear, and where trust was not something to be feared but embraced. The rancher's presence had become a steady anchor in her life, a reminder that compassion and care could exist in a world that had once seemed only cruel and unforgiving. As nights passed, they continued to build their bond. The girl learned to rely on the rancher not just for protection but for guidance, friendship, and understanding. She laughed more, spoke more freely, and even began to teach herself small skills on the ranch independently, knowing he was nearby if she needed help. Each day was a victory, each shared moment a step further from the darkness that had once surrounded her. By the end of this chapter of their lives, the rancher had helped her reclaim a significant portion of her independence. She was no longer just a survivor. She was growing into someone who could thrive. She still carried the memories of her past, but they no longer dictated her life. She had learned to face fear with courage, to trust with care, and to embrace the possibility of happiness once more. And the rancher, who had come into her life quietly and without expectation, had become a protector, a mentor, and a steady presence who promised, with every action, that she would never face harm again. The ranch was no longer just a place of work and solitude. It had become a sanctuary. The animals moved about with familiar ease, the wind whispered gently through the hills, and the small cabin glowed with warmth and life. Together, they had weathered storms, faced fears, and built a foundation for a future filled with hope. And in that quiet, ordinary, yet extraordinary life, the young woman began to understand the true meaning of safety, trust, and healing. The young woman had been living on the ranch for several months now, and the rhythm of life had become familiar and comforting. The sun rose and set over the hills, painting the sky in golds and pinks, and each day brought new lessons, small victories, and quiet joys. The bond between her and the rancher had grown stronger with every chore completed, every animal cared for, and every shared evening by the fire. She had begun to trust him completely, not just for protection, but for guidance, support, and companionship. One crisp morning, she rose before the sun, the cool air brushing her face as she stepped outside. The ranch felt peaceful and alive. The horses nickered softly, the chickens moved about the yard, and the distant hills stretched endlessly under the rising sun. She had learned to greet each day with a sense of purpose, and even the simple tasks of feeding the animals and tending the garden brought a feeling of accomplishment and belonging. The rancher joined her shortly after, carrying buckets of water. "Morning," he said with a small smile. She returned it, a sense of calm and confidence in her expression. "Morning," she replied. Over breakfast, they talked quietly about the day ahead, plans to repair a fence, check on the animals, and harvest vegetables from the garden. The conversation was simple, ordinary, but it carried a deeper meaning. It was proof that she could participate in life again, that she could plan, work, and dream without fear overshadowing her every action. After breakfast, they began their work. She moved with a sense of confidence that had been absent in the early days on the ranch. Her hands were steady as she held tools, her eyes focused on the task at hand, and her voice carried with clarity when she spoke. The rancher noticed the subtle changes, the way she moved with purpose, how she smiled more freely, and how she interacted with the animals as if she truly belonged. Each moment reflected her growing independence and resilience. During a break, she approached the rancher. "I think I'm ready," she said softly. He looked at her, waiting for her to continue. "Ready to go into town by myself," she explained. "I want to see the world outside, even if just for a short time. I know you'll be nearby, but I want to try it." The rancher studied her carefully, seeing the determination in her eyes. "All right," he said finally. "We'll go together, and if you feel uncomfortable at any time, we'll come back. But I believe you can do this." Their trip to the nearby town was slow and cautious at first. She observed her surroundings with keen awareness, but there was no panic, no instinctive fear that had once dominated her every step. The rancher stayed close, silently encouraging her, reminding her that she was safe. She entered the small shops with tentative curiosity, asked questions politely, and even purchased a few items she had long wished for. Each small interaction became a celebration of her courage and growth. When they returned to the ranch later that day, she felt a quiet sense of pride. "I did it," she said, a small smile on her lips. The rancher nodded, a warm expression on his face. "You did. And every time you try something new, you'll grow stronger." That evening, as they sat by the fire, she reflected on how far she had come. From a frightened, cautious girl who could barely leave the cabin, she had become someone capable of stepping into the world with bravery and curiosity. The days continued to pass with steady purpose. She tended the garden, fed the animals, repaired fences, and explored the ranch further each day. The rancher remained by her side, offering guidance when needed but allowing her space to take initiative. With each task completed, she felt a growing sense of pride in herself. She realized that healing was not just about feeling safe. It was about reclaiming the ability to live fully, to participate in life, and to trust oneself as well as others. One afternoon, while walking along the creek that ran through the property, she paused and took a deep breath, feeling the wind brush against her face. "I never thought I could feel this free," she said quietly. The rancher smiled, understanding the depth of her words. "Freedom is something you earn one step at a time," he said, "and you've earned every bit of it. You're learning to live, not just survive." She nodded, her eyes reflecting gratitude and hope. The rancher had also begun to see changes in himself. Living alone for years had made him accustomed to solitude, and yet the presence of this young woman had brought warmth, purpose, and connection into his life. Watching her grow, heal, and reclaim her independence gave him a sense of fulfillment he hadn't realized he had been missing. He knew that their journey together had changed them both. He had provided protection, but she had given him companionship, trust, and a renewed sense of purpose. One evening, as the sky turned soft shades of lavender and gold, she turned to him with a thoughtful expression. "I feel like I can finally breathe," she said. "Like the weight I've been carrying is lifting." He nodded, quietly acknowledging her words. "That weight will never fully disappear," he said gently, "but you've learned to carry it differently now. You've learned to live with it without letting it control you." She smiled softly, understanding the wisdom in his words. Weeks later, they faced another test of courage. A severe storm had swept through the area, with heavy rain, strong winds, and lightning striking nearby trees. In the past, she would have panicked, frozen, and felt helpless. But this time, she faced it with calm determination. The rancher guided her as they secured animals in the barn and tied down loose equipment. She followed instructions, offered help, and even took initiative in places she hadn't dared to before. When the storm finally passed, she realized that she had not only survived but had participated in protecting the ranch alongside the man she trusted. By now, the rancher's promise, made quietly on that first night, was no longer just words. She was truly safe. No one could harm her here, and she knew it. But safety had grown into something deeper: confidence, independence, and the ability to face life's challenges with courage. She had moved from fear to trust, from despair to hope, from isolation to connection. One morning, as they worked together in the garden, she paused and looked at the horizon. "I think I'm ready for more," she said softly. The rancher looked at her with curiosity. "More?" he asked. "Yes," she replied. "I want to explore life, make choices, and continue building a future. I know you'll be here to guide me, but I want to try living fully." He smiled, proud and touched by her words. "Then we'll do it together," he said, "step by step, just as we always have." The ranch became a place not just of survival, but of thriving. She learned new skills, cared for the animals with love and patience, and even began small projects on her own, like expanding the garden and mending fences independently. Each accomplishment reinforced the idea that she could face the world with courage and intelligence. And the rancher, ever patient and protective, continued to guide her, proud of her resilience and strength. As months passed, the young woman became confident, joyful, and independent. She still remembered her past, but it no longer dictated her life. She had reclaimed her sense of self and learned that trust could exist, that care could be genuine, and that life could hold beauty even after pain. The rancher's steady presence had given her the tools, courage, and belief in herself needed to flourish. One clear evening, under a sky filled with stars, she turned to the rancher. "Thank you," she said simply, her voice filled with emotion. He looked at her, quietly nodding, knowing that words could never fully express the journey they had shared. "You've earned this," he said softly. "You've worked hard, faced your fears, and taken your life back. I'm proud of you." She smiled, feeling the depth of his words, understanding that she had not only survived but had truly begun to live. Life on the ranch continued, steady and filled with purpose. The animals thrived, the land flourished under their care, and the young woman embraced each day with courage and hope. She had found a home, a place of safety, and a guide who had promised, and kept, that no harm would come to her. The scars of her past remained, but they no longer held power over her. She had grown stronger, braver, and capable of facing whatever came next. And in the quiet moments, as the wind whispered through the hills and the fire crackled in the cabin, she finally allowed herself to believe in the simple truth. She was free, she was safe, and she had a future worth living. The lonely rancher's promise had been fulfilled. No one would ever touch her again, no one would harm her, and she would never have to face fear alone. For the first time in her life, she could look ahead, not with dread but with hope, courage, and the certainty that life could be beautiful once more.